Thank you everybody for the patience and thank you for joining us today. My name is Sara Aguilar. I'm the interim director for Latinx Affairs. And today you've joined the Maverick Diversity Institute session on the impact of racial perceptions and appearance stereotypes on Latinx in the United States. To start off, I would like to let everybody know that I have put the link in the chat box. If you have to sign in for the session, make sure to use that on there and that'll get you signed in. And also the Maverick Diversity Institute offers challenging and unique workshops and programs that will help you become a diversity certified expert on inclusivity, access, and unique and equity in your workplace and classroom environment. Simply register and attend 4 of the selected programs over the course of the academic year, write a short reflection, and have your diversity passport stamped by a diversity and inclusion staff member. At the end of the semester, bring your passport and receive a certificate of completion that can be used as a part of your professional development plan or report. We all play a role in making Minnesota State University Mankato a welcoming and inclusive institution to work, learn, and grow. And as always, I always like to acknowledge that we all work, live, and play on Indigenous lands. And with that, we'll get started. Let me see here. So to start off, I'd like to kind of go over the term Latinx, Latino, and Latina. So the term Latinx emerges an alternative to the word Latino, Latina, or Hispanic. And it really coincides with this global movement to introduce gender neutral pronouns, nouns and pronouns into the language. It's also a very pan-ethnic term that is really meant to describe and summarize the population of Latinx identifying and ethnicity people living in the United States that share a similar background. The term is actually not common practice within the community here in the United States, and that would be the Latino community. And most studies, current studies, show that it's mostly used by women ages 18 to 29, and it's only used by 3% of the Latinx population. And most are also highly educated individuals. And the term Latino, Latina, Latinx, and Hispanic are actually US born terms. Most individuals that are from Central, South America, or the Caribbean actually do not identify as Latino, Latinx, or Hispanic, but usually by nationality. So this is where you kind of hear terms such as, Mexican, Salvadorian, Honduran, Brazilian, so forth. Or you might hear the terms Mexican American, Salvadorian American, and so forth here in the United States by people that don't share that term or don't identify with the term Latino. Okay. And then the term itself of Latino was born here in the US, like I mentioned, and it was first used in the 1990s. It really emerged in local media out in the West Coast and was later picked up by Los Angeles Times newspaper. And that's what really kicked it off to start being used more in the media, in newspapers. And so that's where you see a lot of pan-ethnic institutions using the term and for political organizing and trying to bring that Latino community together. And then the term Latinx itself was first seen online around the year 2004, but it was fairly uncommon until recent use in social media by activists, academics, politicians, and students. So I do want to remind everybody that the term itself does not describe a race, but the ethnicity of a group and that have shared traditions and history. So that's kind of what the term Latino and Latinx mean. And if anyone has any questions at any time, go ahead and unmute yourself, or I'll try to keep an eye on the chat. So you're more than welcome to ask questions as well. And now I want you all to take a couple seconds and imagine kind of what images come to mind when you hear these words, Latina, Latino, Latinx, and Hispanic. Okay, so I just want you to take a couple seconds and just whatever kind of pops into your head first. You're more than welcome to share if you'd like. I'll see if I can find the chat here in case anybody's typing anything. You are more than welcome to unmute yourselves if you'd like to share. All right, so I'm having issues seeing my chat box. So just give me 1 second. Okay, so I'm not seeing any, oh, here's some comments. So some of you are saying Spanish speakings from Latin America, indigenous societies, you know, proud, communities that you've worked with are proud. Okay, so those are very common, and some of those are kind of common things that come to mind, and also some very positive things. So I'm really happy to see that as well. But that's not the case for everybody. So sometimes, you know, the images that come to mind usually are those stereotypes. Some of the images I have on the screen, you know, are of like Jennifer Lopez in the movie Made in Manhattan, Sofia Vergara in Modern Family, the scene from West Side Story, for any of those that've seen it, you know, this image of kind of like the gangster. But in reality, individuals identify as Latinx come from different backgrounds, have different skin colors, and they look different. But usually most people, when they think of a Latinx person or a Latino, they're going to be thinking this brown individual with dark hair, dark eyes. And I really want you to think, you know, how did you imagine this person? Did you imagine them? Did they have an accent? Did you only think of their national origin, or did you assume they're a Mexican? Did you question their legal status? So that's something that keep in mind, because sometimes that's a lot of things that come to mind for a lot of people when they hear the word Latino, Latina, or Latinx. So there's this idea that all Latinx individuals are the same. So this is where this homogeneous origin stereotype really comes from. All right, so we, especially in the United States, it's very common to see Latinos as this group that is the same, monolithic society, that we all think the same, we all look the same, we all like the same things. But in reality, the perception really depends on what part of the country you're living at. So for example, here in the Midwest and in Southern Southwest in the United States, most Latinos are perceived of Mexican. But if you tend to go out in the eastern parts of the US, especially like New York and Bronx and so forth, they're gonna perceive Latinos as Dominicans and Puerto Ricans. And then if you go into Florida, especially in Miami, a lot of Latinos and Latinx are seen as Cuban American or just Cuban. So this idea that the Latinx community is a monolithic group is so ingrained into our culture that politicians tend to see and treat Latin America as this culturally unified region, when in reality it's not. And the Latinos in the US, you know, have an extensive political background that ranges anywhere from Democratic, Republican, Independent, and everything in between. So there's this idea that we all think and vote the same, but in reality we are not. It really depends on where you're coming from, what part of, you know, your background is as well. So we are a culture with numerous subgroups, and we all have our own unique identities. So we are not this homogeneous stereotype that is very common in the US. So now I'm going to show you a quick clip of a great documentary that I would recommend everybody to see. It's called Latinos Beyond Real, Challenging a Media Stereotype. And it really talks about, it gives you a quick look on how the Latinx culture is portrayed in media and film.
Breaking news right now, chaos erupts after a controversial police shooting in Anaheim. And tonight, the tension continues.
They just released the dog and I had my baby.
The FBI reporting that there's been a 40% increase in hate crimes against the Hispanic population in the past 5 years.
The number of hate crimes prosecuted in San Francisco has doubled in the last year.
It was an unusually warm night when police say a group of teenagers set out to go, quote, beaner jumping.
3 Eastern Pennsylvania teenagers will stand trial for the fatal beating of a Mexican immigrant.
There were all these things that my parents showed me and that I didn't get to see on television, which was dignity, Latinos with dignity.
You want me? 60 pesos.
A lot of unconscious racism exists because these type of images, these type of perceptions, these type of values have existed so long. They are the norm.
Sometimes the director says, wow, no, he's more street, you know? He's like, talks like this. He talks like this, man.
Hustle me, man. I only got one more wire, okay?
Mi amigo. No más tequila. Already muy loaded.
We are in a new millennium, and these characters still keep popping up.
But I'm Puerto Rican. I'll be great at selling drugs.
The Supreme Court today ruled unanimously to uphold the most significant part of Arizona's strict immigration law, the, quote, check your papers provision.
It is an invitation to racial profiling.
And you know, this illegal immigrant thing, it really affects everybody. In fact, today, Charlie Sheen forced to hire an American hooker. Can you imagine?
Mothers killed, children executed. The tactics of vicious Central American gangs now on U.S. soil.
Illegal aliens are in the country, including many murderers and rapists.
95% of all outstanding homicide warrants are for illegal aliens.
Someday we'll kill him. Someday.
I didn't know whether it was a game or not. I just knew that these kids were being racist against Mexicans. And it offended me personally.
As you can see, that video really points out how the media sees the Latinx culture and individuals in a very negative light. Even in cartoons, so it's not something new or recent that's been happening. This has been a historical thing that has been happening, that the media uses Latinos, whether that be just in everyday news or film. They have, even during the silent film days, Latinos were viewed in a very negative light. But if you do get a chance, I do recommend for you to view this documentary on your own, Latinos Beyond Real. It is on Cultura, so if you're a MSU student or faculty member, you can see it free if you just log into that as well. So now we're gonna go ahead and start talking about some of the stereotypes that we do see in media relating to the Latino culture. So some of the stereotypes we see, first we're gonna talk a little bit about the Latino stereotype that is seen in the US media. And like I've mentioned, there's very few positive roles for any Latinos, or Latinx stereotypes. For Latinas, these stereotypes tend to be, that they're hot-tempered, they're tempestuous, promiscuous, and sexy. And they include this fiery Latina and the hot señorita kind of view of it. And, a lot of these stem from the fact that Hispanic and Latino women are continuously sexualized and eroticized in popular programming. So just think of different characters you might have seen on TV. For example, Sofia Vergara's character in Modern Family. Her character's anger is always viewed as spicy, and in many ways her emotions are always invalidated by those around her. She's seen as this really kind of dumb individual because she struggles with the language. And she's also always seen as this trophy wife. She has a heavy accent and she always has problems pronouncing words in English, dressed scandalous, they really accentuate her curves. And so these stereotypes date back to the 1920s and 30s, with like Dolores del Rio playing exotic and passionate lovers in the 1920s, Carmen Miranda playing the sexy and bombshell character in the 1930s and 40s. So this is not anything new to media representation of Latinas. And then we also have the maid character, which is usually seen as a struggling character, dresses modestly. She works at a hotel or she works for some rich family and she takes care of their children. She usually speaks English with a very heavy accent as well, or her English is broken. And usually they refer to their employers as señor or señora, kind of showing that respect, right? And they're seen as lower than everybody else. And if you think of this, some of the examples, are like Consuelo in the Family Guy series, or Jennifer Lopez's character in Made in Manhattan as well. And then we also have this portrayal of the virgin, the Latina virgin. And that one, the most common one that is in recent media, is an example of Jane the Virgin. So Gina Rodriguez's portrayal of the romantic comedy is, this passive person. And she's Catholic and learns, that she's pregnant after she accidentally gets inseminated and all this. But it really just shows that Latinas are either super sexy or they're going to be like this virgin character that is super Catholic and super passive and kind of just does what is told. Thank you for that comment, Carl. And then for men, the stereotypes are a little bit different. So, we're seeing the stereotypes in media for men as like this gangster, cholo, gangbangers. And, we hear this repeatedly, not just in film, but also from our politicians. So that's something, and I've put up some pictures, Blood In, Blood Out, which was a popular movie that talked about Latino gangsters in Los Angeles. And then we also have an image of one of the most popular gangster characters in film. And he's, known and has been stereocasted into that role. On the other hand, we have the Latin lover. So we have, Latino men portrayed as these sexy men, they're playboys, and that's pretty much all they can do and know how to do, and they're not committed. And they're also portrayed as violent individuals. They're usually either portrayed as, their domestic violence in shows, they're beating someone. So there's always a lot of violence when there's portrayal of Latinos. Or they're portrayed as gardeners, which is kind of the opposite to the maid of the Latina. And they're also portrayed as machos, like they have to be in charge of everything, they have no emotions besides anger. So you can see that a lot of these are stereotypes that are very negatively affecting the Latino culture. One of the most recent movies that came out and brought a lot of controversy regarding this kind of cholo gangster stereotype was Shia LaBeouf's movie, The Tax Collector. So if you haven't seen it, you know, that's one of the movies where he plays a character as a gangster because he grew up around that individual. And so there was a lot of controversy with that movie as well, just because of the negative representation of Latinos in the media. There's also a lot of other stereotypes presented. Like I've mentioned, there's some with our politicians. And the most common one you'll hear in the news used a lot is that illegal alien or illegal immigrant. I know now the term that is most used is undocumented immigrant. You also hear the word job stealer. Okay, so we're all Latinos are immigrants that are here to steal your jobs, when in reality, that's not the case. Or you hear the opposite, where we're all hard workers and we do a great job. And then you hear that we're lazy and undocumented. As you can see, there's a pattern here of very many different stereotypes that are used, and they're countering each other. Okay, and then you also hear that they're drug dealers, and the most famous one is, you know, bad hombres that our current president used. You know, we have, as I have on the picture there, his quote is, "We have some bad hombres here, and we're going to get them out." So it really shows that our community is struggling to get positive representation in both film, media, and news outlet as well. All right, so now I want you to think of what other stereotypes besides the ones I've mentioned have you heard? And there is no judgment in this, so if you'd like to share, go ahead and unmute yourself or go ahead and share it in the chat. So I'll give you a couple seconds to kind of think of other stereotypes that have you either heard or seen within the Latinx culture, or someone from the Latinx culture be called. Okay, so some of you are saying overweight or out of shape. Okay, so yeah, those are some things that we are hearing, you know, as well. Any other thoughts or comments?
I worked in Central California. I worked as a peace officer there before coming here as a faculty member. And kind of a long story short, I got my doctorate in sociology when I was working as a trooper in Michigan. I went out to California and really immersed myself in the, more specifically, the Mexican culture, and met with a lot of people, worked with a lot of people of different ethnicities, and again, specifically Mexican immigrants, Mexican second, third generation Mexican Americans, and really got an appreciation for the culture and the challenges they faced. And I remember, you know, I made the comment about pride. I remember just having just a checking on a car with a young man and his date at one of the oceanside turnouts where people would park and watch the ocean, and just, you know, I just wanted to check on the car. It was late at night, and I asked him, just chatting, what he did, and he was very kind of ashamed to admit that he worked in the produce, you know, business. Basically, he picked in the fields, and Monterey County, where I worked, is essentially America's salad bowl. So if you look at the grocery store, Monterey, Watsonville, Castroville, all these towns in Monterey County are represented in our produce section here in Minnesota. And it struck me, you know, I told him, I said, look, don't be ashamed. You're a hardworking individual. You've got a steady job. There's nothing to be ashamed of. And I thought it was just so counterintuitive that so many of the Mexican immigrants and the second and third generation Mexicans that I'd met were so proud of their family and their heritage and whatnot. It just struck me as just kind of odd that this young man should have been felt ashamed. And I think this was a year or so before the current president took office, but I think it was kind of that mentality that was making its way even in California, where the economy in California was starting to take some sort of a downturn, and I just think people were really sweating the immigrant laborers because they felt that they were somehow taking too much. And I just want to make the comment that that even people who would otherwise be proud of who they are and what they're about seemed to be impacted by those stereotypes, especially as the rhetoric got ramped up.
Yeah, thank you for that comment, Carl. And I think that's really important to bring up too, that because of the way we're perceived, it does bring a lot of, issues with the way other, people in our community view themselves. So that does show that there's a lot of shame that is pushed onto the Latinx community. And so that really impacts everybody involved, especially our youth, because they're being seen that they have to meet X, Y, and Z criteria to be able to achieve something, and to be better than the other. So they are very hurtful stereotypes, and hopefully we will eventually get over them or progress past them. I shouldn't say go over them, but see them less and less. And so, Carl, you brought that up, so because you brought that up, we're also gonna switch the topic over now to kind of those influences that those stereotypes have on the Latinx community. And one of those that is very common is hate crimes and racism, okay? And in 2008, the FBI annual report showed that there was a 21 increase of hate crimes, and a total of 485 were reported, which was 35 more hate crimes reported than the previous year. And it had been at that time at the highest reported crimes in nearly a decade. And other things you see with this, is racism. And with racism, people always use these stereotypes to pretty much telling us we're bad and scary, and people see them as less human. And when you make people seem less human, it's very easy for them to become violent or to be seen as violent individuals. And some of these, sometimes racism can be as simple as telling someone like, don't speak Spanish, speak English. You're in the US, Spanish is not welcomed, even though Spanish has been spoken in the United States longer than English has, and the US does not have an established language either. But if you ever have gone through the immigration process, I myself am an immigrant, and to become a US citizen, I went through the immigration process. And even though we don't have an established language in the United States, you are required to know basic English writing and reading skills in order to pass the citizenship test. And also, we've seen a lot of incidents and videos. I'm sure some of you have seen videos online of Latino-looking individuals that have been attacked by people just because they look out what people perceive as Latinos. So they're brown individual with dark hair, dark eyes, maybe they spoke Spanish, and so that's kind of what triggered the incident, and they're being told to go back to your country. And a lot of Latinos actually are born in the United States. So that's something that a lot of people don't realize. And also in the southwest parts of the country, a lot of those states like Texas, California, New Mexico, Arizona, they were all part of the Mexican territory until the Treaty of Guadalupe happened. So that's something that we have to remember, is that Mexican Americans have been part of the United States for a very long time, for multiple generations. So that's something that you have to think about. Yes, and Carl did mention that people do forget that California in large parts used to be of Mexico used to be part of Mexico until that 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. So yeah, so that's something you guys should always remember, that only because someone is Latino or Latinx does not mean that they're an immigrant or they're undocumented or any of that sort. And then there's also this continuation of this anti-immigration rhetoric, okay? And it's important to remember that this rhetoric has been around since before the US, since 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe, and it has been a period of violence that was celebrated as progress, okay? And a lot of this, has always been a history of racial violence by law enforcement, whether it was the US Marshals, passing of laws. There was a passing of law in 1924, this Immigration Act, that really was against immigration. And so that really pushed for those Jim Crow laws and segregation that really kind of helped those laws come into I'm sorry, I'm forgetting what's here today. Jim Crow laws and segregation, that Immigration Act really helped those laws come to term later on in the US history as well. There's always been a history of voter suppression against the Latino community. There were forced sterilization laws at one point, and even up to like the 1970s and 80s, Latina women were being sterilized without their knowledge in places like California hospitals. So that's something that has not been, that is not new in our history. And as recently, we've seen forced sterilization happening in those immigration detention camps along the border. And also in 1924, the US Border Patrol was established. And that, the US has also praised the militarization of the border and, soldiers for showing their strength in order to secure the border. So it really has been an era, and it continues to be one where the US-Mexico border is creating this dividing line and really pushing for this negative stereotypes of the Latinx community. And like I've mentioned, the immigration rhetoric we are seeing it today with the border being portrayed as this very dangerous place, and anyone that lives near the border is seen as the suspicious and dangerous. Political rhetorics that were used 100 years ago that caused fear are returning. So that's seen a lot now. And we all wish it would go away, but for some reason it keeps coming back, and that's something that our politicians keep using and pushing, that really enforces those negative stereotypes. And also we're seeing a lot of, family separation currently. We're seeing that family separation at the border, concentration camps, a lot of inhumane treatment where all these individuals are being packed in small places, not given proper hygiene, like soap and toothpaste and so forth. And then we're also seeing the rise of more Border Patrol vigilante groups. And one of the most common ones is the Arizona Border Recon, which is actually an armed civilian organization that really takes into their own hands, is what they say, the matter of illegal immigration and illicit trade, drug trade. And they became very well known because they were featured in a documentary called Cartel Land. And so they've been seeing an increase of their members, and a lot of their members tend to be law enforcement officers. That also creates an issue with trust of law enforcement within the community of Latinos, even those that have no fear of immigration, departments such as ICE.
Could I interject?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah, totally agree with what you just said there. And one of the things that was interesting about the state of California is, in California, you are empowered as a peace officer under certain sections of the penal code. And so if you're a California Highway Patrol trooper, you're an officer, you're under one section. If you're a peace officer for a municipality, it's a different section. And one of the things that they notice, especially in Southern California, is that when ICE and some of these other federal alphabet agencies, as we would call them, FBI, DEA, and all these things, would come in and they would wear the word police on their outfits as opposed to, FBI or something like that. And so people would get confused, and it's a toothless law, but the state of California actually passed a law that prohibits anybody who's not empowered as a peace officer to wear the word police on their uniforms, to wear the word, because they saw that as being so detrimental. The way the federal government was handling these cases and as aggressive and unconstitutional as the things that they were doing, they actually passed this law. And it's not like you can have officers going out there and arresting federal agents, but I thought it was interesting that even the law enforcement community in large respect supported that move, because the ICE and CBP, their activities were making the job of actual peace officers, public servants, very, very difficult. There's a huge dividing line between what we would do and what the feds would do. And, they're not the same thing, but the public doesn't know any better.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, and that's common practice still, with ICE officers being in civilian clothing and detaining individuals. So thanks for sharing that, Carl. Another thing that I don't know if many of you have heard, but just recently, just a few days ago, the current administration, our current president actually passed a proclamation calling it the National Day of Remembrance for Americans Killed by Illegal Aliens 2020. So this proclamation kind of just says, that, and I'll read a portion of it for you. It says, on this National Day of Remembrance, we pause to honor the memory of every American life so egregiously taken from us by criminal illegal aliens. As sons and daughters and mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, and as American citizens, these precious lives are irreplaceable piece of our national community. We solemnly stand with their families, our angel families, who have endured what no American family should ever have to suffer. Today, we recommit to ensuring those responsible for these strategies face justice while taking every action to prevent these horrific acts from occurring in our nation. So that's like the very first paragraph of this proclamation. And later on, it states too that because they're claiming that so many families have lost lives to illegal immigrants, they have created a new office with the Department of Homeland Security called Victims of Immigration Crime Engagement, called VOICE. And they also go on to talk about, the creation of the wall. This is the president talking about that he's already created 400 miles of the wall, and he wants to complete another 500 miles. And he's just pretty much stating all the things that he's always been pushing, that we need to build this wall. We need to keep out all of these gang members. And even says on this proclamation that, through migrant protection protocols, they have deported more than 20,000 gang members and over 500,000 criminal illegal aliens. So as you can see with this proclamation, he's really pushing for that rhetoric of, racism and anti-immigration, and also putting again in mind that anybody that's an immigrant, whether they're documented or not, they're criminals, they're gangsters, and that they're killing American citizens. And so it's really interesting as well, and to take into consideration that this, Day of Remembrance was proclaimed on November 1st, 2020, which also coincides with the Latin American celebration of Day of the Dead, where Latino individuals celebrate the death and honor the death of those who have died and their families. So I think it's really interesting to see that there's still this push and the stereotype pushed by our administration that Latinos are, just killing American citizens. No, he is not trying to hide his bias. Is something that was mentioned in the comments, and it's very true. He's not. He's very pushing for that. He's not hiding his bias, or as some claim, his racism. Sorry there. So I want to show this video. So 6-minute clip here of these individuals talking about, you know, their race. And I really want you to pay attention on how some of them describe how they feel as being Latinx individuals in the United States, and kind of what these stereotypes have created them to perceive themselves as.
I think the Latino identity is pretty confusing to me because oftentimes I find it in a little checkbox on a form, and I'm confused on whether I should put Latino or Hispanic, but I'm Mexican.
As Latin Americans, as Hispanics in the US, there's a community that gets built regardless of which specific country you're coming from.
And our history is a history of African people, indigenous people, Europeans, conquistadores, all these different people colliding, many times not with their consent. So that informs all these loaded issues people have.
It's like navigating 3 identities. If you're from the States, you're American, you're Black, and you're Latina. And furthermore, wherever country that you identify in coming from. And that's a lot to navigate.
But at this point in my life, I actually don't identify as Guatemalan, and it's something that I guess a lot of like young immigrants sort of feel, where there's this saying like, ni de aquí, ni de allá, not from there, not from here.
In trying to blend in with the culture in America, I gave up a lot of what I grew up with. Maybe I saw it as something that was kind of shameful or in the way. I wanted to dress like my friends in America. I wanted to talk like them. I wanted to be like them, listen to the same music. I started listening to country music.
I got all these crazy questions like, did you come here in a canoe? And do you know what snow is? And do you live in a hut in Puerto Rico?
I thought my name was Spick until I was about 13. And that was my first awareness that race was an issue.
People say, oh, you look like a white dude. In some contexts, not in all contexts, depends where I am, depends who I'm with, depends whole lot of things. Depends what language I'm speaking, but however I look, when I leave my name, I can't get a phone call back about an apartment in New York City. And this isn't like 10 places I call, this is like 30.
And I remember telling a kid one time, I was like, let me tell you, the Ku Klux Klan comes here and they see your last name, you're going too, bro. You know? And the kids are like, what are you talking about? And it was like a big thing.
People generally, you know, unless I speak Spanish, you know, people assume right away, I mean, that I'm African American, that I'm Black. You know, I mean, it's you know, just one of those things. It may be the deep voice, it may be the color of my skin.
Because I talk white, I'm not Dominican, or I'm not Black, or I'm not Afro-Latina, or whoever people perceive me as of being. And that hurt, and that still hurts.
Because one of my daughters is lighter than the other, they had Blackness issues. And I remember my oldest daughter telling my youngest daughter that she was Black and that her hair, she said something, and I remember crying, like immediately, like, oh my God, no, no, no. And I had to sit them down and talk to them about our roots and that everything that they learned from the family was wrong.
I feel like I wanted more of my culture. You know, I grew up, there was a point I stopped speaking Spanish to her, and I still don't speak to her in Spanish. So I feel like something was lost, and I don't know if it was just because she was busy raising 5 kids and didn't really think about culture in that way and how I would come to identify myself.
Growing up, like this, as as a young teenager, I told people I was Puerto Rican, which is completely, which is right. But at a particular point when I became a little more politicized, I was definitely more of a black nationalist than I was a Puerto Rican nationalist. Maybe because the concept of black nationalism and the black liberation movement is so much more accessible. There isn't a language issue. So yeah, I totally was reading Malcolm and Marcus and James Baldwin and Huey Newton before I read any of the Puerto Rican nationalists.
Either you're black or you're white, and if you're like kind of in the middle, you kind of like don't want to be in the middle. You want to, a lot of us want to be white, but we're still brown. We're still color, we still have color. We're still, according to what the institution is telling us, what race is based on your skin color. So you're like, I'm brown. So that's kind of like where it came. Like I'm not black. And I'm not white, and I don't want to be white, and so I'm kind of brown, and this is kind of like a thing that's there.
If you are closer to being white, you are supreme. If you are not, you are less than. And to me, that's how I've understood it, and that's why I think it's very important that Latinos who look like me say, you identify as Latino, cool, Colombiano, cool, whatever else, but you benefit from light skin privilege. The fact that you have ojos claros, people want to fetishize that, understand what that means. However much I might want to say, oh my gosh, I'm so special because I have green eyes, you're perpetuating white supremacy by running with that.
I'll talk to a young girl, a young teenager, and she'll say, I'm not white enough to fit into mainstream society. I'm not Black American enough to fit in that, in that faction of society. And I'm like, but you know what? You're the best person to be kind of like a connector between both, because in you is everything. And being Latino in an American kind of New World way is basically being a physical embodiment of how America began as we know it. So you're every woman. So for me, being Latino is being phenomenal.
As you can see, a lot of some of those individuals talked about kind of their struggle. And the one that really stands out to me is the young man that says, he wants to be white, but he can't, he's something in the middle. So that really takes, into perspective on what, stereotypes can do to an individual as well. And with that video is kind of where I'll end my presentation. So now I'll open it up for, any questions or comments anyone might have. You're more than welcome to, unmute yourself or put it in the chat.
I guess I just like to say that, I know law enforcement gets a lot of the blame for some of the things that are going on as it pertains to community relations between the government. And to be quite honest with you, I served as a peace officer for 20 years in Michigan. I grew up in the Metro Detroit area, and then I moved out to California when I couldn't take the snow anymore, and came back, but to the Midwest. But a lot of those stereotypes that we face as law enforcement are rooted in fact, and it pains me to say that I've worked with some of the greatest people in the world in uniform, but I've also worked with some of the most prolific racists, some of the most bigoted people. And what I tell students when I teach a course, it's called Law 310, Diversity and Policing in a Diverse Society. I explain to them that when you have somebody who, say, is the racist pizza delivery person or the racist banker or something like that, they can do a certain amount of damage to an individual. But when you are a peace officer and you have the power and authority of the state and you are biased against Mexicans or blacks or whomever, the power and authority of the state is overwhelming, and you can have a very deleterious effect on someone's life for the long term. And it pained me to see as a supervisor, some of in both places, Michigan and in California, the attitudes that were perpetuated, where you referred to, some of these officers referred to the people in their communities as animals, as apes, as less than, dehumanizing, as chuds, and these different terminologies that they used. And so, the solution would hopefully be to get people who are more emotionally mature and able to be peace officers. But the other problem is The job attracts, and this is my own opinion, but the job attracts either opposite sides of the spectrum, either people who truly want to help and serve their communities or bullies. And you can see that personified by all these cops that are walking around wearing Punisher logos on their uniforms. And so I guess the whole point of this statement is to let everyone in the room to know that, there is a good proportion of peace officers. I wish I could say it was, in the 90 to 100% range, but there is at least more than half of peace officers out there that are trying to do the right things for the right reasons. And those of us in these types of positions are at least trying to mitigate the damage caused by the people that are inevitably allowed into the profession because they're hired by people who are just like them.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And hopefully in the future, more people learn about stereotypes and the consequences they have on individuals. So maybe there'll be change. The hope is always for positive change in the future for everyone, and for everyone to learn and be educated as well. So if anyone else has questions or comments, more than welcome to share them. All right, if there is no more questions or any comments anybody would like to share, I would really like to thank you for joining, and hopefully you learned a little bit, something new today, and our conversation got you thinking. As always, if you do have questions later on, you're more than welcome to send me an email, whether you want to talk about stereotypes and the Latino community and the culture, or just some of our, cultural celebrations and so forth. My email is always open, as I can't have you in my office, unfortunately. Otherwise, my door is always open. So go ahead and send me an email if you have questions, and thank you for joining.